Jerry Pintoji will deliver the valedictory address. First, I invite Jerry Pintoji onto the stage. Jerry Pintoji is an eminent poet, writer, editor, translator, and journalist who lives and works in Mumbai. His novel, M and the Big Home, won the Sahitya Akademi Award in 2016, which has been translated in Marathi, Tamil, Italian, and French. He has won the Windham Campbell Prize for Fiction besides the Crossword Award and the Hindu Lit for Life Award. His novel, Murder in Mahim, won the Red Go Award at Dehradun Literary Festival, and his translation of Babul's Shevhami Zat Soryu, Marathi collection of short stories, and his translation is When I Hid My Caste and Other Stories, won an award at the Bangalore Literary Festival. His other book, Helen, The Life and Times of an H-Bomb, won the Best Book on Cinema Award at the 54th National Film Awards. His other works include Surviving Living, Asylum and Other Poems, Reflected in Water, Writings on Goa, When Crows Are White, Monster Garden, and The Education of Youth. Welcome, Devi. I invite Rabindra to chair this session and Professor Mala Sridharji as well to make concluding remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. So, we had 2 days of excellent presentations on Nissim Ezekiel and the contemporary trends in Indian poetry. Now we are at the last session of this seminar, and I hope Jerry will make a very interesting presentation and give a fantastic valedictory address, and we'll have the concluding remarks made by Manashri. Over to you, Jerry.
Forgive me, I don't think I can sit here. I feel much more comfortable when I'm on eye level with people and talking to them, because this is about someone whom I care deeply about. This is the thing I wrote about in the Outlook recently, which is right now. We have a neocracy which has replaced the gerontocracy. The neocracy is young people who decide when they will cancel you, or when they will throw out the baby with the bathwater, because they feel that you've done something wrong. Now doing something wrong is human. We are all going to do something wrong. Young people don't believe it themselves, because a lot of what happens out of doing something wrong comes out of the fact that you have the power to do it and you do it, right? And we have denied young people power and agency for so long that they do not believe that when they have power, they will do something wrong. But they will. Everybody will. If you have not done something wrong and you are still creative, then you are what is called artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is, of course, a truly self-congratulatory term for what is actually artificial plagiarism. It plagiarizes what happens in the past, right? This is the important thing. The important thing about Nissim was that he was really, really nice, and he was really, really horrid at the same time. That was the two people who coexisted in Nissim. If you were, my first encounter with him taught me the power of silence, right? He came to Elphinstone College to do a workshop with us. It will please Shreek Sen, who has been pleased not to attend today, that the second session of that was a prosody workshop, which We all attended because we really wanted to learn prosody, because we believed in prosody. We actually believed in it. Now, why did we believe in it? We believed in it because by then, the poem had become impossible to write. Okay, nobody could write poetry anymore. And why could nobody write poetry anymore? Because we all ignored Yeats. Yeats told us very clearly, call the poem an entertainment and you may be able to write a poem. Allow the poem to become something larger and transcendent. And then where is the wisdom from which you will speak? Every poet knows how empty the pot of wisdom actually is, from which this poem must be conjured up. How do you deal with it? Nissim did a very smart thing. He took on the Psalms, ancient wisdom, received wisdom that by then had already been thrashed. Everybody, all the Abrahamic tradition had taken the Psalms and danced thunders on them, because the Psalms are what the Psalms are. They come out of a patriarchal tradition, they come out of a war enclosed nation. They come out of a tradition of, the Orthodox Jew gets up in the morning and the first thing he does, the male Orthodox Jew, is thanks God that he was not born a woman. Okay, that's the first thing he does, because in some ways it's an acknowledgement that women have it tough, that women have the backbreaking role in society. So this, we had begun to understand that we had been cheated as students because people had been explaining poems to us. There's that very famous Robert Frost moment, right? When someone asks him, what is the meaning of this poem? And Robert Frost, being Robert Frost, slows down, thinks for a bit, and then says, you want me to say it worse? Okay. Billy Collins comes along later and says they took the poem, tied it to a chair and whipped it, right? And asked it what it meant. Now, all our lives we have been told what poems meant. All our lives we have been taught that way, and we have assumed that this nonsense called poetry, because it was nonsense. Where does this nonsense begin? This nonsense begins with this desperate attempt to prove that you are worthy of being taken into school. You have to learn nursery rhymes. What is the nursery rhyme that you learn? I'm a little teapot, short and stout. This is my handle and this is my spout. When the water's boiling, just lift me up and pour me out. Now, many years later, I'm 15 years old. My neighbor is a Maharashtrian. They are first generation English speakers. She wants her child into school and she sends her child to me and says, teach her English. So, I say, son, I try to have a conversation with the kid who bursts into tears. Okay? So then I tell the kid, okay, let's just do nursery rhymes. And the kids are very relieved, stops crying and then says, you can get the water. So I said, very good. Then she said, I'm a little teapot. So I thought, oh, experiential learning. I will show her a teapot. I will show her what it means. So I brought a teapot and I showed it to her. And she burst into tears again. Okay? And I realized that basically, fundamentally, this child wanted to get into school, or I don't know if she wanted, but the parents wanted, and we poisoned the well of poetry at that source and say this is what is going to be the coin with which you will bribe the guards at the gate of the school to get into that thing where we will beat the curiosity out of you. You take a preschool child to the park, they have 1,000 questions. You take a child afterwards, after school to the park, they have no questions. And you ask, what did you learn in school? And they say nothing. And they say, well, what do you want to do? Nothing. It's just like school and education is very kill curiosity, right? And we actually train children with poetry to have their natural curiosity curbed, their spirits dampened, and their energies denied. That's what we do with poetry. And then we are really surprised that our students don't want to learn poetry. They don't want to learn poetry because it's always been a place of horror for them. It's been a place of pain. Okay? That's your first level. Now, the second level I think is when you start doing poetry in school and you have Lord Allen's Daughter, which you have to memorize from beginning to end. Which is bad enough, but Miss Martha Gomes, 8th standard teacher of Victoria High School, wants you to be able to say the verses with their numbers. So she will ask you 7 and 15. And you have to quickly get which is verse 7, say verse 7 and then jump to verse 15. Okay? It's a way of training your mind. A lot of what we did and a lot of what we thought was prosody was actually the British telling us how we are supposed to speak. The British telling us that it was their music and their language. Okay? Now, some of us got it. Some of us like it. Some of us speak that way and we have been privileged all our lives for speaking that way. Yeah? And therefore for us prosody becomes seriously important. Prosody becomes the internal music of the poem. Of course it is the internal music of the poem, but there are musics to the poem. The poem is an experience that will be shaped inside your mouth. It will not be shaped in your head. It will not be shaped in your cerebrum. It will be shaped when your tongue explores the rhythm of the piece. That's when the music starts happening for you. This means then, to take it one step further, and this is where almost everyone who's in academics begins to feel a little uneasy. We have good poems that are our poems. They are not good poems by a universal general standard. The canon begins to collapse when we say musics. Aesthetics as a tradition had in its goad prosody. Prosody sat in the lap of aesthetics. Okay? That aesthetics is being challenged. It was a male aesthetics. Feminists say, this is not my aesthetics. In the afternoon we heard people talking about the difficulties with, in the morning, with Nissim's patriarchal positioning. Now, what if we look at Dalit aesthetics? Okay? What if we look at minority aesthetics? Each one of these aesthetics enters the room, and when it enters the room, what was aesthetics? The privileged aesthetics were two kinds. There were two privileges. One privilege was white skin privilege, the other privilege was Savarna privilege. Sanskrit aesthetics, chand, meter, the rules of grammar. Sanskrit is the greatest language ever, excluding everybody. So it becomes then important for us to say, how do we study poetry while acknowledging that there are no tools in the kit anymore? Poetry has now escaped. It has left the building. It has left the university. It is sitting firmly with rupee kaur under a tree somewhere. Okay? The kids are reading rupee kaur. It horrifies me, frankly. But we probably horrified our teachers. Okay? There's a great poem that Eunice D'Souza, Eunice D'Souza wrote, which is, she says, my students find it funny that D'Souzas and Jassawalas can write English poetry. Yeah? It was not so long ago that English poetry in India, Indian poetry written in English, was seen as that little street lined with curiosities leading nowhere. Okay, today we don't believe it. Today it's like, actually, are you completely out of your mind? You stupid, short-sighted white person. That really. Okay, the English novel in India never had that problem because novels have something to offer you in terms of sociological evidence about people's thinking. They're easily used. fused and transmuted into ways in which you can actually sort of study a culture. Poetry doesn't do that. Poetry is just poetry. Okay? You come to it naked. Because poetry itself is naked. But Nissim came to Elphinstone College and blew our minds out. Okay? Because he began by asking us all to submit a poem. We all did duly. All these poems were handwritten. I recently found the whole sheaf of them that I had kept, including my poem. He read them out, commented, talked about them. There was one famous line that he said, which I battle it still. Someone had written a poem about writing a book. And at the end of that poem was Shanti, 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 which Nissim said was borrowed, of course, from Eliot. And caused a little storm, because of course Eliot had borrowed it himself, right? I mean, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti just doesn't turn up in the mouth of a North American pretending to be a Britisher. Get real, yeah? So there was that little frisson that happened. And then he said, when you're tempted to write a poem about writing poetry, write it and then burn it. Okay? And I often write poems about writing poetry, and each time I have to say, Nissim, shut up. Okay, inside my head I have to tell Nissim, shut up. I am going to take the liberty of writing this poem, regardless of your advice. Now, obviously his advice was facetious. He was probably like, another workshop with young people and reading their dreadful poetry and pretending that it matters at all to me. So at the end of that, someone said very sound, I think it was a Bengali, said very urgently that we should do prosody the next time. And we did a session on prosody the next time. It was boredom beyond belief. Like beyond belief. It's like, I thought at the end of it, if this is what this poetry shit is about, I'm not in. I don't want to be writing like this. I don't want to care. Okay? And I think fundamentally poets don't care. The meter happens in the inspection of that happens later. Like someone comes along and says, oh, that's a metrical line. And you say, yeah, you don't know. Of course. I did that deliberately. Yeah, that's right. Of course you did. You heard the line inside your head. You didn't even hear that line inside your head. What you heard inside your head, what you felt when you wanted to start writing a poem, was you felt the urge to write a poem. Okay? Sometimes you don't know what to say. And this is a conversation I had with Nissim, which was lovely. At one point we sat down and I was telling him, it's so blocked, I can't write any poems. He said, take a piece of paper and write the. So I said, the. He said, yeah, write the and then see what happens after that. After that, a noun will come. I said, an adjective can come. So he said, okay, adjective and noun, now put noun and adjective, put one, put the other, see what happens. Okay, so for a long time, I used this, I tried. Didn't work very often it started off something. And then later I was sitting with Nissim, and there was a young person in front of us, and the young person is now saying, I can't write poetry, I'm feeling so stuck and I'm blocked and whatnot. And Nissim said, very simple, take a piece of paper and write, and I think you're repeating yourself. He said, write I. I looked at him and he said, yes. I used to say no. I say I now, because I seems to be a source of perennial fascination for people. I thought, actually, very true. And then this young person sitting in front looks at him and says, as though you didn't write I poems. Which was kind of like, yes, I did, but the I in the poem is often not me. So the young person said, means you're lying? Nissim said some lies are larger than truth. But this young person was so aghast at this, she picked up her various things and she walked out of the room. And Nissim said, let us go and have tea. Because that was the way we settled most of it. He was, I think, okay, my favorite story about Delhi and Bombay comes from the time that I went to a poetry reading at some school, which was 7 stories up, and there was an elevator to go to the auditorium or something. And the person in charge was a Delhi woman who had, she had forces background. And so we arrived at the lift, she and I. And there were two cleaners, Maharashtrian women standing in front of her. And she said to the Maharashtrian cleaners, she said, Nissim Ezekiel, he's a very famous writer and he has won these many awards and whatnot. And they both looked and they said, Namaskar. And then they turned and they stood their ground. They were getting into the lift because they were in the line. She was really embarrassed by this. Really, I felt very bad for her. And she said, I'm sorry when we got out of the lift. She said, I'm sorry, Bombay culture. I said, I think it's called democracy. I had the feeling. But the idea that you could have your Sahitya Akademi award-winning progenitor of English poetry sitting in a room, like he would be sitting there and sleeping, and his legs would be up on the table with his socks with holes in them. Every year it was a joke for us to buy him new socks, which he didn't seem to use because those hole-wala socks were in place all the time. And then he would wake him up and say, listen, I've got 4 poems, can I read them to you? And he'd say, yes, yes, sit down. And he'd listen. And eventually, he only commented on your punctuation. Or he would ask, why are there capital letters at the beginning of line 1, 7, 8 and 9? And 2, 3, 4, 5. So you start, listen, can you say something about the poem? Yeah. That, tell me it's an epic. All poets who ask for feedback want to be told that they are brilliant. Okay, and they've just written the most extraordinary poems ever. I just started giggling about with commas. And then I realized that actually he's the one person who has probably read the most Indian poetry in English among everyone because of the number of magazines he edited. The poetry magazine that he brought out every month, K.T. Daruwala told me, he put 10,000 rupees in every issue. He put his personal money into the issue to bring it out. By the time of the PEN, of course, there was money coming in from the ICCR and stuff like that. So he was doing it, it was nothing that he had to pay for. But he was actually paying for those issues to come out. And those issues, I made whole. This is the thing about Indian poetry in English, right? You don't get copies on the second-hand market. You get a lot of Kenneth Alcott, because everybody studied that contemporary, the modern. You don't. Then you go and find me a Ulysses D'Souza fix with that great cover with the Hindi has like a X mark from the fix. You look at it and you think, whoa, super. That's all. That clearinghouse moment. And I remember thinking about this, right? Arvind Krishna Mehrotra told me that the first time he encountered Adil Jassawala's poetry was at Pilu Pochkhanawala's house. Now, Pilu Pochkhanawala, for those of you who have forgotten, it was one of the greatest of Indian sculptors ever. He was a Parsi. Recently, because I think as far as art goes, if you don't have the price tag, you're not interested. So the last Pilu Pochkhanawala sold was, reserve price was 3.5 crores. Okay, yeah. Anyway, I saw that. Pilu Pochkhanawala had a big house in Wadi. So it had a garden, and in the garden there was a beautiful her shack in which she did her sculpture. And the garden was also used for public events like poetry readings. Mehrotra walks in. On stage is Nissim. Nissim is reading Adil's poems. Adil is not yet in India. Adil is on his way because he's coming back from England. And Adil and Arvind become friends over Nissim's reading of Adil's poetry. It's a moment, it's a Bombay moment. One of those lovely things that only could happen in a city where I remember my first poetry reading. We used to have something in the poetry circle. The poetry circle lasted for 10 years. It was a fabulous idea because really got a whole room full of people who are interested in poetry or in some ways connected with poetry. But if you tell people that you sing, everyone will say, give us a song. If you say, you play the piano, they'll say, go and play something. You say people write, you tell people you write poetry, they'll say, I also did that in college. And now I gave up. Because it is like, that is what you do when you are in college. You don't do it afterwards. Right? So, in the poetry circle for 10 years, poetry was important. Nobody had to convince somebody else that the book that a caesura was not something to bother about. Like if you had a caesura, you think a caesura wasn't working, you could express your great grief over the situation and be understood around that thing. Okay? So it was often contentious, it was often snobby, all the problems that groups of people had. But it was a wonderful space where you could actually read and listen to poems as they were born. Okay? So the first Arundhati Subramaniam book that came out, all of them were old friends. The first Ranjit Hoskote book that came out, all of them were old friends. Okay? Like, I mean, we knew each other's work before it became public. It was that lovely feeling of seeing a poem like a kitten opening its eyes for the first time and looking out at you and slightly timorous but slightly brave as well. It was that lovely moment. Right? Nissim came to the poetry circle regularly. Adil came to the poetry circle regularly. Right? And I remember the first deep focus that I had. Deep focus was a special event where if you had like about 10, 20 poems ready, then you could read them all at one go and people would then, would talk about your work, discuss your work, analyze it. But very precious because it was like time that people were really paying attention to the work. Okay? Adil came and he was carrying his bottle as always. And he kept drinking from it, and finally he was sitting on a chair, then he got off the chair and he sat on the floor, and then finally lay down on the floor full length, and I thought, okay, first poet I have completely laid out flat with my poetry. Nissim sat to it very politely and then asked me the usual questions about starting with a strong word, focusing on the end of the poem. You see that in a lot of Nissim poems, the end becomes a click and a closed door. Those are the weak ones about it, where he just decides that, okay, this poem has gone that far, and now you can't go any further, now close the door with a clever click. Okay, and the poem then, in some ways, you get up with that vah-vah feeling. You're like, yeah, mara yaar, this is a nice closed door thing, and at the same time, the poem is denied an expansiveness in your head. So very often I prefer the poems where he just gave up and stopped when he wanted to stop. Okay? So you look at Stone, the poem about the stone. You look at many of them. There are click end poems, and we would discuss this with him as well. He was very good at listening. He was very good at listening to half-assed people who had written 3 poems, telling him where his poems were going off key and stuff like that. I remember there is an entire sequence of Nissim poems which he wrote when he was in Singapore, called the Singapore sequence, which have never been published. And they were never published because the community told him, no, don't. And he didn't, actually. He just listened. By this time he was Sahitya Akademi, Padma Shri. After the Padma Shri, he went to Hyderabad. And some local group decided that he was going to be felicitated, so they put him on a shield, okay? And they lifted him up to the shoulders and gave him a sword to hold in his hand, and then paraded him through the town. It's so lovely. I don't know where those photographs have gone, but this one has the face of a good, demigod. He stood there very looking like, okay, in the life of a poet, sometimes you're put on people's shoulders and taken in a procession. So, I would have been rather surprised by all this myself. But that was just fundamentally accessibility. His accessibility taught us accessibility, right? So eventually, I get a request for a blurb or to read and give comments on a manuscript every week. So every week I get one. I always write back saying, I know that you're probably in a hurry. I know that this is, but I'm reading 18 books right now. You are number 19. Okay. I will come to you, but I also have my own reading to do, like I'm reading, and I also have to do some writing, and I have to do something that will earn some bread. So it will take me about 6 months from the time that you send me your manuscript. If you are willing to wait, I will then give you a reply after 6 months. That's my adab to Nissim. My salute to Nissim's training, that you, part of your role is to make time for the next generation and to take their concerns seriously. So I do understand that Nissim is very difficult. Sometimes if you were to read the entire oeuvre, most people content themselves with poet lover bird watcher because it's nicely philosophical. They content themselves with Night of the Scorpion, which according to me just should be erased. Then I mean, just stop it. Like Night of the Scorpion has run its course. Don't do it now. I mean, just don't. Okay? Because this is the thing. I think in some ways, Night of the Scorpion becomes so popular with us because we are eager to prove that Nissim is Indian. I counted the number of times Indian was said about Nissim yesterday. 36. Okay? I don't know if we were discussing Sekul Atkar, whether 36, or if we were discussing Premchand, whether anyone would mention that they are Indian. At all. Okay? So there are two things that are operational here. The first is the crazy and lazy suspicion. Okay? It is a suspicion of this as a colonizer's language, as a language of power, and as I put it, there is an Angrezi Devi in Bihar. There is actually a Devi in a temple to Angrezi. She is now a Devi, a legitimate Devi. And then my students, this Devi's tikas are, in one hand, she has a red hot pair of pliers. You must open your mouth for prasadam and she will pull out your tongue, your mother tongue. And in the other hand, she has a green card. Nobody reads those non-dictionary. But the plagiarist, the arch plagiarist, Shakespeare, stealing Merchant of Venice from the Italian, right? Stealing from the Italians all the time is still read today. Lies have a greater life than truth. This is what every autocrat also knows. That lies work faster. Lies run where truth lives. Okay? So having said that, I don't know if there are any questions or we can just go out and have tea. What do you want to do? You don't want to ask questions? Fine, I completely understand. I need to talk about Nissim. You don't want to say? Anything you want? Okay. The metricality of Nissim Ezekiel's poetry came up again and again yesterday. There was metricality in some of the poems. Like in all modern poetry, there are some poems that are going to be metrical and most of the poems are not going to be classically metrical. But you can read anything into a metrical form if you read with attention and care and love. All you have to do is put on the poetry voice. The poetry voice is the voice of the heightened sensibility. You do not read poetry in the same way that you read prose, we were always told. But we were also told about elision. If the sense of the line runs from one line to the next, raise your voice at the end of the line to indicate that the end of the line has not come, but it is spilling onto the next. You don't do that after T.S. Eliot read Wasteland. T.S. Eliot read Wasteland on the radio and decided that this is how we are all going to read poetry. When Nissim read his poetry, he read his poetry against T.S. Eliot. Okay? And often it embarrassed listeners. It embarrassed listeners because it sounded like mono acting. It sounded like he was overdoing it. And this is because we were told by T.S. Eliot that we have to put our entire faith in the words. There was no room for Abhinaya. There was no room for intonation. You did it flat. You did it there. You spoke as if no emotion was there. They would fill the lines themselves. You read into the void. That's how you did it. Fuck off. Like seriously, fuck off. That's not us. That's not how we read poetry. We read poetry with energy, with enthusiasm, with metrics. I loved it the moment when Ranjit Hoskote at the Goa Arts and Literary Festival read out a poem and then started singing in between. Quite sweetly, he started singing and I thought like, break it Ranjit, break it and remake it, because that's what we've got to do. If Pound's words make it new, make sense, then it must be a newness that is somewhere mined from us. And our us is a shifting, dirty, contaminated, impure, who knows what Indian means us. If someone tells you that they know what Indian means, be very suspicious. Be very suspicious. They're coming at you from some purity angle. They are dangerous people. Most people know that there is no us. Unless the us is Vasudhaivam Kutumbakam. Everybody is us, then I take that us. Then you can tell me anything you want about us, but don't tell me about Indian. Okay. I'm not sure you know. That's all I'm saying. Because I'm not sure, I asked G.N. Devi, Professor G.N. Devi once, how many languages do we deal with in this country? And he said 1,537 and counting. Okay? 1,537 languages means 1,537 simultaneous, intersecting, overlapping realities. Where everything can be different and many things can be held as the same, but the same and the different will keep shifting. Okay? Because nobody wants to be called a Bombay poet, say. Now they started talking about us as Bombay poets. I don't know what they mean. Okay? Because I look at Ranjit and I think like, if Ranjit was here, he'd be sitting peaceably up there between those two wonderful ladies and he would look right at home on a stage. And here. So what is the similarity? I don't know. I love Ranjit. I think he has an affection for me. But what is the commonality? Where is this commonality that we are constantly looking for when so much tells us that there is much more to rejoice in our differences and to enjoy in our differences than to see this chimerical notion of an Indianness. Questions? Otherwise, I'll keep on asking myself questions. Yeah, go ahead.
So, first, thank you for, I think, the most delightful 45 minutes I've spent in the longest time. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
My question is...
Now your question.
Now my question. Do I have the right to judge Nissim Ezekiel's poetry when he's being bad? Okay, this comes from the little point I tried to make yesterday.
Very good point.
That the I is not Nissim Ezekiel.
Yeah. So, absolutely. Okay, so now we are in that troubled time and those troubled waters about like what is the new morality? This is actually a morality question, okay? And the funny thing about my generation and morality, like was, our generation and morality was like someone brought morality into the room and we all got together and kicked it out of the room again. Okay, like, I remember a French teacher saying, and then this French author, he was off on his travels when his daughter died, and someone in the back of the room said, so what? Actually, that's one level. Now there is another level to it. That level seems to be that if you are not, okay, there are sins that are unacceptable and sins that are acceptable. Okay? This morality is based on an assumption that there are certain things that you cannot say or do, and other things that you can say or do which may be against the law and may be against ethics, but they are forgivable. Okay? And then there are other things, there are things that we're just not concerned about. Now, for instance, Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde was a pedophile. He liked his boys under the age of 18. Oscar Wilde, André Gide, and Alfred Lord Douglas Bose all go to Tangiers. André Gide writes about this in his autobiography. Oscar gets him a boy, finds a boy for him. André Gide says he was in heaven that night. Okay? With whatever he did with that boy. None of this has affected Oscar Wilde's acceptability. Okay? I don't get it. I don't get it. So my stand is this. For me, art is what ugly, impure, imprecise, broken down humanity tries its best to create. It is hypocritical. Accept that. It is going to be hypocritical because we write into the page what we cannot be ourselves. Right? We cannot be that, so we write that into the page. Now, is that page going to help you or not? If it is not, by all means reject the page. By all means say this is not my writer. That's your freedom. Because if I am guarding my freedom, I must guard yours as well. And I am guarding yours and saying, you feel like you should cancel Alice Munro because of what she did to her daughter, feel free. You must. Okay? I accept your right to do that. The problem happens when it becomes a classroom. Right? Because then in the classroom, the interrogation is not the text, but the interrogation is of the private life of the writer. And then that becomes a problematic situation, which is why I am deeply relieved that I am not teaching literature. And I have all sympathy for you. And I hope that you will negotiate this minefield because it is a minefield. Okay? With grace and wisdom, more grace and wisdom that I have shown in my answer. Yeah? Just, yes, sure. Just quickly. Yeah?
Which poem would you recommend for undergraduate teaching? A, you said that we should remove Night of the Scorpion. We've had enough of it. Yeah. And then the third thing is that, what do you have to say about Delhi University removing him from the syllabus?
Delhi University. What do I have to say about universities? I don't trust or like universities at all, but they are chapa machines, no? You turn your back and what do you have to prove when you go to get a degree? I can sit in a room and be bored for 8 hours. Now you can hire me, I will sit in your room and be bored for 8 hours. So I am worthy of being hired. I have been through this. I know what hierarchies are like. I know how to say yes, miss, no, miss, and give me any this. I know that. So I go to the boss, yes, sir, no, sir, give me an increment. So that's what our universities are. They are chapa machines. That's all. Okay. So when they remove it from the syllabus, you are the star of your class. Every classroom has one teacher who is the star. What I used to do. Many of our teachers did. I remember Miss Jasawala coming in when she was teaching us 1984. She started with Sophocles. And one sweet girl at the back who did not know Dr. Mrs. MC Jasawala put up and said, Miss, this is the class on George Orwell's 1984. Why are you in Greece? And she said, do you mean to tell me that you will understand autocracy before you understand the Greek understanding of what is a dictatorship? And we were led through like a history of the great dictators of the world, including, she made us recite together the great speech of Charlie Chaplin at the end of Great Dictator. And at the last month, we suddenly happened on 1984, and she said, but make notes. Go read the novel, make notes. What do I get? I'll give you the background, I'll give you the tools, the toolkit. Go into your class and do what you want. Okay? The syllabus is your Christmas tree. You hang your ornaments on the Christmas tree. They will take away the ornaments. They will come back 10 years later and say, Miss, you remember you told us about that? You did, was it in the syllabus? I said, no, it's not in the syllabus, Miss, but it was so nice, Miss, I loved it, Miss, and I read Ruby Kaur, Miss. And you want to slap them, but there's left enough for opening space for them to read Ruby Kaur. And from Ruby Kaur, Nissim Ezekiel will grow. Faith, people can change. I don't know, I'm saying Ruby Kaur. My cat. I'm only going to kill that cat. What a lovely ending to that poem. I'll tell you others also. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Kajal.
Hi, Kajal.
I am not a poet and I'm not an avid reader.
You're here! Wow, Jai Ho!
Just telling, I wanted to say. My question is, it might make some people uncomfortable in this room.
Arey, look at me.
So, as you mentioned, there are 1500 languages and 1500 realities. When I read a poem from any person who's written that, I see a reality, and then that goes on for the 1000 poems I read. Every reality is different. As a mental health patient, I sometimes find it difficult to understand, as you said, truth is very short-lived. Sometimes I feel it's very difficult to navigate truth from art, and especially so when you know that artists like Osterwald, and there are people like that whom you don't know then how to, what is truth, what is art, and what is moral.
I refuse to, I don't want to guide anybody because that's not my job. I wish I would, if I would, you'd be in deep trouble if I was your guide. Okay, don't. Like, I find a better guide, really, seriously. What I'm saying is this, I can only tell you my experience, okay? So you read about Picasso. Picasso says that Marie-Thérèse Walters was 14. No, she was 17 and he was 45 or something, and she was the perfect age for him. And you think, yeah, fuck off, past her. That's, she's underage. Okay, different thing that age of consent in France at the time is 13. Okay, so she's not nabalik in that sense, but she's still young, yeah. Okay, like, I mean, that's not perfect for you. Okay, now this is all my problem. Okay, I have a problem with Picasso. I walk into a room and I look at the paintings on the wall, and there's one big splash of color on the corner, and I'm immediately there. I'm looking at it and thinking, ooh, and then I look at the, oh fuck, it's Picasso. Okay. Now, one thing to do is to walk away and say, oh, Picasso, you were nasty. The other thing is to say, this painting speaks to me. What can I draw of? How many roots and of sustenance do we have in the world? Art is one of them. We draw from art what we need. The poem that comes to you will be a poem that you need when you need it. The poem that you start reading and it is, you can drop and move on, right? So, and every reading of every poem is going to be different. Every person is going to bring a different reading to that poem, right? So the poem is a shapeshifter. Art is a shapeshifter. There is nothing in art that you can trust, but there is lots in art that can sustain you. Because the real thing about trust, the problem with trust is that it is most often betrayed by people. People betray trust. Art doesn't. Art makes no promises. Art tells no lies except the really big lies. Art tells you fiction on the cover, which means I'm telling you this is a lie. Now read, don't read. That's your decision. Okay? People tell you that they will be faithful and will not. So the betrayals come from humanity. The trust is, or at least for me, betrayals come from the human world, trust comes from the world of art. Question? Yep.
If there are no more questions, since you are governed by the clock, may I intervene?
Last one.
Just the last question.
मुस्लिम की कोई नाइट ऑफ द स्कॉर्पियन में भारतीय दर्शन को किस सीमा तक उभारा है?
There is a sort of strange story that I have to tell you about the Scorpion. It was written when he was in Canada, and He was getting ready for his reading, and the host came in and said, getting ready. I hope you read something Indian, a poem that's Indian. And so he sat down and wrote Night of the Scorpion. Okay? It is, if you want an Indian poem, it is as Indian a poem as you can get. And he said it came in the first draft. He made very few changes after that. It was done. Okay? It is often read as a village poem because there's a scorpion, and in the city we don't get scorpions. Man, seriously. Like I don't know which cities you all live in. We have scorpion pets. We have scorpion races. We have scorpions, like literally threatening each other with in school. You took out someone's compass box. You took out everything. You put a scorpion in. You put it in, and you put it in his bag just to see what would happen. Like because there was a graveyard in the middle of the school and there were scorpions in the walls of the graveyard. Anyway, so how much is it a reflection of India? I don't know. It is a reflection of, I don't know if it seeks to be a reflection of India. It seeks to be a reflection, I think, of two conflicting worldviews in that poem. And the worldview that Nissim seems to be standing behind, and this is what I find dangerous in the poem, is the worldview of the woman. Thank God that it didn't bite my joke. That I find suspect. But that's me. Hey, I don't claim to have any truths other than the truth of the fact that I have read Nissim regularly for several years, and I remember asking him, the landscape in its geologic prime, what does this mean? How is a landscape in geologic prime? How can you tell? You look at the hill and think, no, ये तो जवान है, ये तो prime है. I don't know. So he said, you're a terrible literalist. I accepted that. Thank you so much. You've been a wonderful audience. I enjoyed talking to you. Thank you, Sahitya Academy, for having me. Thank you, Vinita. Thank you, Madashri. And thank you, Nissim, wherever you are.
Thank you, Jerry.
Oh, back up there.
So it's really precious to hear your anecdotes and the fact that amongst all of us sitting here, you're one of the rare ones who actually met, interacted with Nissim and met him multiple times, and you have inside stories of so much of his poetry. Thank you for that. May I now invite Madhushree, Professor Madhushree Lal. Okay. All right. So I just want to say, we all need a cup of tea for sure. But I just want to say that in a very humble, in the most positive sense, and in the most beautiful way, and may I say that we may have stirred Nissim's soul through these 2 days of tributes that we paid to him. The fact that we love him, and there are things about him that we don't like, but we're honest about that, and the fact that we've studied his poetry and gone so deep into it, and we have young poets sitting here who are also teaching Nissim. That itself says it all, that his poetry has outlasted it has outlasted his lifespan for sure, but has also carried forward a legacy which is not going to be forgotten easily. And I just want to thank each and every one of you for being here, and I want to thank Sahitya Academy for organizing this. It's really special. And it's a very genuine tribute to a marvelous poet, and we've made Bombay come alive in Delhi, and we've made somebody.
There is more time, so if you have any questions, go ahead. She said we are stopping at 4. No? 3:30.
So what's your word about 3:20?
3:20.
Happening with poetry today. Therefore, we're also talking about the impact.
Yes.
You're the editor of the book.
Shall I read the
Whenever I'll just say a couple of lines more, and then I will invite Jerry to read some poems from Nissim Ezekiel. So whenever I think of Nissim, I always think of the horizons that he had in his sight. And they were all very distant horizons of Yeats and Larkin and a couple of other poets, Eliot. Nobody was there near. Like now we have so many people to look up to. We can all choose somebody or the other as our mentor. But what about Nissim? He really had no one, and he was in that sense a pioneer.
And he wrote with a conviction about what he was doing and with the courage of his convictions, if I can put it that way. That's one very special thought that I have whenever I think of Nissim Ezekiel's poetry. And all the details that I wanted to go into, I did through my paper yesterday. So I'll just pass the mic to Jerry now.
I'll go back. Yeah. Okay, back again here. I thought we should actually listen to his poems and let's just work with this poem I really liked. I've enjoyed always because the only one that comes close to it is the next one by Krishnamurti. Because the terror of every poet is that there won't be a poem left. There won't be anything in the well when you go next with your bucket and try to get a poem. Right? So here it is. Subconscious. Consciously, I ask my subconscious to supply me with a poem. It sends up this harsh message. You have not turned to me for so long. I shall not speak now. How would you understand? Go on, think. What's the use? Without me you're hopeless, helpless. You have lost the art of listening. And I of gushing forth at your command. Leave me alone. I want to sleep. You do not love me anymore. Unloved, I cannot stay alive.
Does it have the poem you recommended? The cat?
The cat, my cat, no, of course. Here is another one, which is one of the things that I think Picasso says is that you have to work very hard at becoming a child again in order to create art. So you start by he also says somewhere that every child is a genius. Every child uses color, paints, and produces just like instinctive works of art, and then growing up happens and they lose their genius. Okay, so this is in a kind of reflection poem on that. The child. Once I was a child, and in the morning woke up to wind and sun, with upturned face, receiving kisses from the constant newness of the world. Once I was a child, and I knew this, whose colors sang the wonders I was born into. You heard the Dylan Thomas, no? Who caught and sang the sun in flight, who sang the wonders I was born into. Once I was a child, remember how I listened to the words around me, fresh as rain, with sudden thunder, fearful in the adult anger, and the marvel of the whispered kindness soaking to the root where all was rest. And now again the simple trust of all that lives is love within me, reaching down the water, up the sunlight, sprouting gently in the fragrant air. Clap properly. The playfulness. He worked for a long time right next to the Alliance process where they taught conjugations all the time. Conjugation. Pretends to pretend, I pretend, you pretend, we pretend, they pretend. I pretended, you pretended, we pretended, they pretended. I will pretend, you will pretend, we will pretend, they will pretend. Pretends to pretend, I will not pretend, you will not pretend, we will not pretend, they will not pretend. No more pretense, an end to pretension. Luckily, I also noticed that there's a clever shift between pretend and pretension. Okay, because pretend is as any English teacher will tell you, that the abstract noun form of pretend is not pretension. It is pretense. Right? And he suddenly moves to pretension. Okay? Lovely switch at the last. It's the last one. See, that's what I meant by the click ending. The click ending. It is a lovely ending. It's a अरे यार pretense का pretension बना दिया. क्या बात है, Mrs. But it's also that it leaves the poem completed. and completed poems often are not as rich as incomplete and sloppy poems. Sloppy in the best sense, I guess, in the sense of like, in a Dylan Thomas poem, you get that sense that the emotion is flowing out of the poem. You're holding it in the words and it's like toppling over and glug, 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 it's falling all over the place. A hullabaloo of balloons, it's rising, it's flowing, it's floating. That kind of thing you don't get in a click poem. Sorry? You know what I think the stone is? It's an unpublishable poem. That's what I think about it, but I'll read it if you want. You've never thought of that? She's a naughty thing to do that. But tripod is so nice. And you see what I mean. Let me just do this, the ones that I have. Yeah. Subconscious said it, this lovely poem. Blessings. This is the poem that I wanted to read at the end because it's a great way to end with blessings. No? May you read wisdom books in the spirit of comics, and the comics in the spirit of wisdom books. When your water tap leaks, may you care as if you are paying for every drop needed by the city's source. Whatever you pursue, let it not be happiness. May you find it often resounding in your normal pursuits. Remember the time. There's never enough time. Enjoy the time. There's plenty of time. Now notice that, remember the time begins us down a road where we are thinking, remember the time we used to play together? And then he cuts it and says, remember the time? There's never enough time. Enjoy the time, there's plenty of time. This is also in a strange way the Chestertonian paradox that everyone enjoys playing with. Straighten yourself, lovely advice. Straighten yourself up to your full height and find humility. It's better there than lower down. May your solitude taste good and your company taste good, like food when you're hungry. It's the hunger that counts. God send thee consolation when you tear yourself apart to find Him and find Him missing. Thank you so much. That was the points I wanted to read. You should buy the corrected poems. See if you can get the audited. This is the irritating thing about how OUP behaves. They had Geet Patel do the introduction to Nissim's corrected poems. Then they had a reissue, and they got Leela Gandhi to do an introduction. This is fine, I have no problems with Leela Gandhi. But Leela Gandhi and Geet Patel could have been in that book, The earlier introduction, new introduction. Geet Patel, Nissim's closest friend. When the riots broke out, Nissim lived in Geet's house for the whole of those 2 or 3 months. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Jerry, for the most, enjoyable session, in any seminar or for a long time. I just want to say that what you say is so right, and it's very sad, the way we kill the creativity. In a class when you tell students that a poem is something, it's an emotion, there's no one meaning, otherwise it wouldn't be a poem, it is ambiguous. But they are so used to, they will not settle till you explain to them, and every word then they're satisfied has a meaning. This is how sad it is, so.
Yeah, I'll tell you what our educational system is, if I may use a head. Anisul Rahman Sahat, may I use a head as a demonstration tool? Okay. So we unscrew the top of the head, then we turn on the tap, then we close the head, then we close the nose and we say, what happens when you close the nose? You open your mouth and you start out onto the paper. Then if there is lots of you get 60 marks, A+ grade and whatnot, and they go out into the world. That is the education system. Now they are used to that. It's like, when I confront my postgraduate class, I say you are animals in search, you are wild animals in search of notes. Okay? They are just going through the woodwork, like you would say, hey, notes milega, kya notes milega. Yeah, of course you can. So then, and what, that you are now chasing like a hyena after kisi aur ka vomit. Okay, then you are licking up that vomit and then you are vomiting it out fresh. And your teacher is standing there thinking, Beta, if you wrote one original word, I would give you marks.
Jerry,
Just one
before it
original.
gets any more gross. and as you can see, you have the audience related to your words. But I now have to invite Professor Malashri Raj for concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that yours?
Thank you, Jerry Pinto, for a very lively, valedictory address or discussion or conversation, whatever you want to call it. But being an academic for 45 years, of course, I can't let him get away with what he did to us. And so I'm going to recoup some of that territory that we seem to have lost. And look back on the last 2 days in my brief concluding remarks as to what have been the aims of this Centenary seminar and what have been some of the takeaway points for many of us who we will take into the classroom and we will share with our students, with our colleagues, because I think this has been an outstandingly successful seminar. And those of us who have had the privilege of attending this with the Sahitya Akademi are indeed grateful to the institution for and for all the speakers who have made a tremendous effort in all the studies that have gone into it and in writing such excellent papers and making very, very powerful presentations. So, in my mind, there was one phrase that was forming as I listened to all the discussions and the sessions, and sort of Nissim Ezekiel comes to me both as a dreamer and also a doer. And if I'm going to be talking about the papers, and I will not go over any of this chronologically at all, it's just my impressions. In his own lifetime, what I heard from Jerry Pinto now and Jatin Das yesterday, and many of the others who actually knew and interacted with Nissim Ezekiel either directly or through correspondence, his presence, his friendships, and though Jerry may not like the term, the Bombay poets was something that my generation certainly grew up knowing. I did not ever meet or know Nissim Ezekiel personally, but I knew the term Bombay poets and read the Bombay poets, and they were a great influence on those of us who were studying in the 1970s in Indian University and reading Adil Dasawala and Nissim Ezekiel, of course, and Ulysses Sousa, and so many others who were in Bombay. What the seminar did for many of us was to bring those days alive. And the stories about the get-togethers of the seminar, as you said today, there were sheets of paper where people wrote the drafts of poems and you could get feedback from each other. That environment of friendship, colleagueship, open criticism, group work, the collective of poetic criticism seems to be one of the losses that the digital age has brought about. I don't know if those losses can ever be made up by Facebook and Instagram sharing and all the blogs to which people comment, but I'm very, very grateful to you, Jerry, and to the others who have brought alive those wonderful days of poetic discussion. Now coming to the key point that emerged of the significance of Nissim Ezekiel in the history of Indian poetry in English, I'm afraid for the 40th time in the seminar I have to use the word Indianness. And I do it unapologetically
Because however diverse the idea of Indianness might be, it is there. And particularly at the time when Nissim Ezekiel was writing, and in the poems which have been canonized, even if you want to change them, etc., the Knight of the Scorpion and the Scotty. Nevertheless, the Indianness is not associated only with the Indian English idiom, but with a certain cultural milieu that is captured in Nissim Ezekiel's poem. For instance, as you just said about the Scorpion poem, that what comes through to you is that mother figure. And yet, when we heard one of the papers yesterday, two of the papers yesterday, and my own work in gender, I am quite often disturbed as to how the sacrificial image is sort of dumped on any woman, and motherhood is always the priority image, as if that's all women are ever born for. And that in reading Nissim Ezekiel's poems, though I don't want to conflate the artist and the person, in many of the poems, the woman is a passive figure. And that is something that the seminar has brought up and I think made us aware of, and we might go back to those poems and read them very differently, or at least with new eyesight. So Nissim Ezekiel does mark a watershed moment in the history of Indian poetry in English, and the Bombay poets are not necessarily a group. Their influence, directly or indirectly, has spread to many other parts of India thereafter. And certainly when Nissim Ezekiel entered the curriculum of Delhi University, and which I know intimately, I'm sorry to hear that actually he's been dropped now, but for years, many of us who are in universities have taught him the whole viewpoint on post-colonialism changed because of poems of that time. So I would say that modernism, postmodernism and post-colonial ideas of what can be done through the classroom of the English departments was initiated by people such as Nissim Ezekiel. And that watershed moment was followed up with many conversations with the past. And those conversations in time has led to the proliferation of the new areas in Indian writing in English that have emerged. And today that focus came through in many of the papers, and I just want to touch on some of the subjects and themes that have come, which may not owe their allegiance to Nissim Ezekiel directly, but I think they belong to the legacy and the inheritance of the kind of poetry that Nissim Ezekiel introduced into the history of writing in India. For instance, eco-poetry. We're doing this all the time. And some of the poems of Nissim Ezekiel do touch upon that. Now, it need not be conscious, but this is one of the major areas that we're now looking at. And the other thing that has happened, again, in carryover from the eco-poetry idea, is the mixing of languages. And you as a translator, of course, will be very aware of this, that the poets today are using much more than English in their poetry and putting in words, phrases from other languages of India and not putting in footnotes. And just assuming that either the reader gets it, and if you don't get it, it doesn't matter. So whether it's a panda, from where we got an example yesterday, or other examples that other speakers brought up, this is now done with a great confidence about multilinguality and multiculturalism. And I completely agree with you, Jerry, that we cannot restrict the idea of Indianness to anything that is definable. It isn't. And you're absolutely right, and others have also pointed this out, that it's now a global phenomenon. But the other area which has emerged is looking back at mythology and revisiting it in new ways. And Nissim Ezekiel did quite a lot of it. And some of the poems were quoted. But in specific terms, papers have referred to visiting the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, other Sanskrit texts, Kalidas. This is happening more and more in Indian poetry in English, which did not happen in earlier times and I don't know how much of it was ever discussed in your Bombay poetry get-togethers, or is this a new writing? But certainly, one important issue that has come up, it wasn't there before. The Dalit writing in English is very new in our formal publishing and literature that is now available. Dalit writing in translation has been available for some time, but it is absolutely wonderful to see the new kind of work that is now being published very, very widely. With Anisur Rahman sitting here, I do want to remind ourselves that the ghazal has suddenly become a very important cross-cultural term. And many of the papers in the conference brought up this idea of the crossovers of many kinds, the crossovers between languages and registers. There was talk about the Japanese form. I'm not sure why that has caught on so widely in the poetic circles. But the ghazal is understandable because the ghazal form was not limited only to the Urdu language, and it is scholars like Anis who made us aware of the vast possibilities of that form. So as we look ahead, and that's my final point, we're looking ahead to something that Nissim Ezekiel himself sort of came into, which was colonial English, university syllabi, teaching in the classroom, professorships, mentorships, whatever, whether you like it or not, you've got to do it. And some of it you enjoy doing and some of it you don't. This is what he came into. What did he and his group create? A discussion, a thinking carefully, significantly about poetry as a genre, as a craft, as poetry, as subject matter, as cultural recognition, as realism, as urbanism, as some of the papers pointed out, and what it can pass on, the possibility of the new areas that I have just enumerated. Now, where do we go from here as we look ahead? And I think we can foresee that from this two-day seminar, we are taking away the possibility of inter-language discourse. And this is a very important feedback that perhaps the Academy would like to build on, because it is not only through poetry that this inter-language discourse happens, but it happens throughout the new writing that is going on. But listening to Jerry Pinto read those poems made me realize how important it is to incantate, to listen to poetry. And although the Sahitya Academy has several multilingual poetry sessions, I think it's time for us to focus on some area-specific multilingual poetry sessions where we can choose a theme, such as those mentioned in that seminar, and focus on 5 or 6 languages with poetry only on that theme, so that we will be able to see the issues that are coming up. So I'll end now, as I think would be appropriate, with a few lines quoted from Nissim Ezekiel's poem called Philosophy. It's a poem that has not been mentioned in the course of these 2 days. Just a few lines. There is a place to which I often go, not by planning to, but by a flow, away from all existence to a cold lucidity whose will is uncontrolled. You read it.
No, it's a lovely poem, absolutely lovely.
It's a beautiful poem. Read it from there. If you don't read it, then I want you to moderate for the second, and we'll end this.
Have you got it on your phone? Yeah.
The philosophy, the poem philosophy, got it? Oh, great.
Fabulous. Thank you. And look at this.
Yeah, it's in tatters.
No, but like,
But
look,
it's-
and it's signed by you, for you also.
That's great. It is from the sound.
This is.
It's from the sound. So, and this is the book that got you the Sahitya.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Philosophy. There is a place to which I go, not by planning, but by a flow, away from all existence to a cold lucidity whose will is uncontrolled. Here the mills of God are never slow. The landscape in its geologic prime dissolves to show its quintessential slime. A million stars are blotted out, I think, of each historic passion as a blink that happened in the eye of time. The residues of meaning still remain as darkest myths meander through the plain towards a final formula of light. I too reject that clarity of sight. What cannot be explained, do not explain. The mundane language of the senses sings its own interpretations. Common things become by virtue of their commonness an argument against the nakedness that dies of cold to find the truth it brings. Thank you, Ram. Thank you, very precious.
You have already on behalf of Sahitya Akademi, I have to thank one and all for being with Sahitya Akademi in remembering Nissim Ezekiel, our dear poet. I heartily thank Kavita Ezekiel Mendonca as well and Sri Jatin Das for being with us. Thanks all. The seminar ends here so successfully. We will have tea together.
Thank you. English also.
Jerry, three of us are crashing on you, taking a photograph. And I'm to my students, right?
I thought